Let's talk about two things here. On a per capita basis, Nigeria's budget is considered too weak for any meaningful impact on its citizens and on the economy. And then, I gather, if I'm wrong, correct me, that the government intends to rebase GDP, CPI, inflation data by 2025. Is that the case? What real impact, if any, will this have on the economy? Take these two questions at the same time, Minister.
Thank you. I think in terms of rebasing, that's just a normal thing to ensure that your figures are in line, and so that's something that is done roughly every 5 years, and it's just a statistical norm. But in terms of the fact that the government budget is relatively small compared to African peers, not to talk of the rest of the world, yes. Government spending at 15% of GDP, government tax revenue at 10% of GDP is far, far too low. And that is why the cause of that was the wasteful, inefficient, and opaque manner in which the foreign exchange of the country used to be allocated, and in which the subsidy regime used to be implemented. And you recall, I said at the beginning that what has been achieved is a recovery from a few pockets to the pocket of Nigeria, to all Nigerians, 5% of GDP, roughly $15 to $20 billion annually. And that, of course, is going to speak to giving government a higher amount of revenue and a higher budget to spend. And in addition, there is a tax reform process currently underway. The legislation is working its way through the National Assembly, and that will, in addition, raise tax as a percentage of GDP to somewhere near the level of other African countries and other countries, not to talk of other countries around the world. It will still be below the 60-70% of GDP spending that you get, for instance, in the European countries, but it will be a step very much in the right direction.
Talked about reforms. The talk is that the reforms of the president has in very many ways pauperized Nigerians with the attendant cushioning policies. No attendant cushioning policies, as it were. Even the promised CNG buses, you don't see them. And then you talk tax reforms, and then you're proposing increase in VAT. I mean, this is making a bad case worse.
Not at all. I don't think so. I think the CNG rollout is underway. The buses are being have been ordered, are being assembled, are being delivered, and are being distributed. And in the first instance, it is the labor unions in particular and student unions that have benefited. And even today, we made arrangements to make more available to them. But let me put in context what you say is making a bad case worse. Without the steps that were taken, what was the situation of Nigeria? Living on overdraft, headed for a fiscal crisis based on the fact that oil revenue was low, theft was rampant, insecurity plagued the land, both in the agriculture and negatively affected not just the social life, agriculture negatively affected the all-important oil sector. That was the situation. And in turning that situation around, and as I say, stabilizing government finances by taking what a few had and giving it to the many, it is something that governments around the world are struggling with. Being able to balance their finances, being able to put government expenditure and revenue on a sustainable basis. If you look at Europe, if you look at the likes of France and Germany, that is what they are struggling with now. Having achieved that, it is a question of mathematics. You say to yourself, okay, 5% of GDP each year is being saved. It means that the revenues to government from that core source will be increasing every year ad infinitum. And that creates and has created a relatively stable, more stable economic environment. The exchange rate that you talk about running away, if anything, it is coming back. It is now, it was once as high as 17, 18, 1900. It is now 1535. That is positive. The budget deficit is down from 6.1% to 4% or thereabouts at the end of the second quarter. The trade balance is positive. The current account surplus is positive. It is 11.5% of GDP. We have over 1 year's coverage of imports. The standard is six months. What we made, what President Bola Ahmed Tinubu made, was less than one month, less than 1% coverage of the current account balance as a percentage of GDP. So these are all the positive trends that have created the basis for us to be confident that given the stability that is now coming to the Nigerian economy, investors, domestic investors and foreign investors will come to the table. We have described what has happened in the oil sector. We have described what is happening in the pharmaceutical sector with the commitment to unlocking the value chain in that sector with specific incentives for manufacturing. And it is the same across the board. For the first time in 3 or 4 decades, we have in Nigeria domestic refining of crude petroleum, not just to give us petroleum products, the likes of PMS and diesel, but in addition, agriculture, fertilizer, and all importantly, petrochemical production.
All right, Minister.
Petrochemical products that provide the basis for industrialization by giving raw materials for pharmaceuticals, for textiles, for building materials, for paints, for chemical industries. So those are the positives that we need to focus on so that these are opportunities for Nigerians to take advantage of. Thank you.
Let me comment here. Last year's budget has been extended by 6 months, distorting the January to December cycle. Even that is underperforming by 50%. But the Deputy President of the Senate says if this budget is well implemented, it will revolutionize Nigeria and its economy. But that's where you have the sticking point, implementation. So what guarantee or certainty do you have that this budget will be implemented to the letter to affect the economy and the life of Nigerians?
Well, as you know, the budget is a statement of intent. And as I said earlier, the commitment is not to meet the budget target of 4.6% growth per annum. The target that we are saying will take us to where we need to get to, and where President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is committed to taking us, is actually 5.5%. So we not only have to implement the budget, we have to crowd in a lot of private sector investment to ensure that we grow the economy at the rate at which we need. So we are confident that given the work of the economic management team, given the preparation that has gone into the medium-term economic framework, that this budget will be diligently executed. And above all, it's so important to emphasize that what is the basis of a budget? It is revenue. Where is Nigeria's revenue headed? Up. Why? Because we have stopped the president has stopped the hemorrhaging. He has stopped the loss of 5% of GDP, worth $15 to $20 billion a year. And that will just be accruing and growing and available to help implement the budgets, the medium-term economic expenditure framework, and indeed the plans, strategies, and programs of the government of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
Briefly, before we let you go, why is Nigeria engaging in very expensive Eurobond borrowing instead of cutting cost of governance? This administration is the biggest so far, and then maybe selling off idle assets with its attendant high yields. Why? Just briefly, Minister.
Well, thank you very much. And very briefly, if you go to the 2025 budget proposal, you see a line there that says privatization. That's a catch-all phrase for crowding in the private sector, whether it's with concessions, whether it's through private-public partnerships, whether it's through adjusting the equity investment in joint ventures. So that is right there. In addition, the commitment is to the private sector. The commitment is to ensuring that everything is done to encourage private sector investment in the economy. That is where the large funds are available. And as for borrowing, you start with the cheapest type of borrowing. That is concessional finance. We are an IDA country. Our aim is to get out of it, but the International Development Association funding of the World Bank is virtually free, 1% over 40 years. We have taken that, we have earned that, and we've got the encouragement and support for the President's programs for the macroeconomic reforms by having a full support, $1.5 billion this year from the World Bank. In addition, you take other bilateral funding that's available. But when you do go to the international capital market and they support you, as they did Nigeria, where we just sought to finish our borrowing program for the year, having taken advantage of the cheapest sources of funds, we now went to the open market. We asked for $2.2 billion. We started at 9 a.m. in London, offices of the investment bankers. By 12, we had $4 billion. By 4 p.m., we had $9.1 billion. It's a sign of confidence. It's a sign of the trust in and belief in the macroeconomic reforms and strategies of the government. It was a good day for Nigeria.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Wale Edun, Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy. Thank you for your time on Arise Prime Time. Thank you.